Author Preface. Illusion. Stranded. I think that's the best way to describe it. A way a person can go deep inside their head and try to make sense of what pain and incident in their life put them through in the first place. But my pain started at home. It began there and developed into something I never pictured it would be. I remember writing stories. It was a way of blocking out the abuse I had to endure from my father and mother. They both had their own special ways of dishing out the anguish. And it wasn't just physical abuse, but mental. And if you're a kid, sometimes you don't see it, until you take a step back and realize just how deep and messed up it was. In my mind, I kept writing, spawning a fantasy only I could understand, that would separate me from what was happening in my life. I started the story, but never knew how to continue. Did I want to tell the truth? Could I? Or did I just want to write a story others would read, but get nothing out of? No, of course not. I wanted people to know the truth. I've always been a big believer of truths. This character was very much a real person. At first attempt, I tried to create a fictional character out of fear and out of judgment. But I also wanted to tell my story. Like I said, it's easier to write fiction. And this is the story that spawned in my mind. Two dark, round eyes gawked right at me. That start was part of what I wanted to include in Stranded, describing a man in his early 30s, an assistant principal, as the story went, an alcoholic and sometimes bully. That's what she said he was. Sherry, the antagonist in the story, although it could very much be me. That's the thing about stories. There's always a struggle, a twist, something that keeps our protagonist from success and creates conflict, and can very much be said about true life. Let's just call him CZ for the sake of this introduction. Sherry told me things about him, and it only made me want to write more. I did. Created a whole character to fill in the holes, because I knew nothing about the man. But the things she revealed were intriguing. I guess all things can be when you're a young teen girl looking for an escape from your abusive life. I continued the story, never knowing where it was going to take me. I just wrote it. Sometimes writing things in school notebooks, a journal I started. Back then, we didn't have much of anything. However, I don't want to say too much of my beginning, since this is more about a single incident that happened to me in high school. But I do want to give some background of my life before the incident, and the things in my life that led me into the path that awaited me. I came to the U.S. at a young age, along with my sister. My parents had already established a life in Chicago, Illinois 2 years before. Originally, my sister and me were born in Mexico, Monterrey, Nuevo León. I don't remember a whole lot of Mexico, but the things I do are flashes of what seemed to be an okay life. A happy life living with my grandparents. My parents married young. My father was, from what I've seen in pictures, a nice-looking young man at the time in his life. I guess the envy of all, and quite the opposite of most Mexican men then. He had light skin and green eyes. His brothers and sisters were all a variety of colors. I had uncles with dark skin, so dark you would think they were African American, and others with light skin and colored eyes. I know this might all seem relevant. However, if you knew my father, you would very much understand why I find myself mentioning such details when it comes to skin color and lighter features. In fact, his entire side of the family were proud of these simple details. And one of the reasons my father as a young man was very vain. Being a lighter shade of skin in Mexican culture is considered something of higher stance. My father used to brag that it had to do with his ancestry, or him being of French and European descent. This was all he had, and he was proud of it. So it's of no surprise why he liked to repeatedly mention it to us throughout our lives growing up. CZ sat on the sand, burying his hands deep into the dirt, with his eyes staring at me. A handful of sand ran through his fingers. The story, Stranded. It's easier to write fiction because you can lie about it, and you can give your characters gifts in which to protect themselves from the villains. I had nothing I could use to protect myself with but my parents. Fiction can be made the way you want it. In real life, I had no control of what happened to me then, so I just wrote it down. My sister and I were very young when my mom and dad abandoned us in Mexico. I never knew the details of why, and they only came into light in my adult life. It seemed that my father left at the encouragement of his parents to pursue a better life in the US. Or as my mother had said, my grandparents had said, para que encuentres una mujer güera. During that time, my parents were having marital problems, infidelity, or so my father believed. As my mother revealed in her own confessions to me later, as an adult, father was jealous of my aunt's husband at the time, who was flirting and harassing my mother. When mother revealed this to my father, father became enraged, however mostly with her, accusing mother of cheating on him. Mother claimed father invited the man out and later threatened to kill him. I'm not sure how much of that is true. Mother has always been a narcissist, something I wasn't aware of, but a fact my sister had often declared. So, because of this accusation from my father, it wasn't a surprise that when my mother got pregnant with my sister, my father didn't believe she was his daughter. That only caused further chaos and turmoil within our family, and caused a gap between my sister and father. So, when my father left to pursue a better life in the US, my mother, at the encouragement of her own mother, followed him to the United States, leaving us with my grandmother. 2 years of our life passed before we would again see mother, and what little I remember of that day still haunts my adult life today. I must have been 6 or 7. I've gotten a new dress for the occasion from my mother. I don't even recall where my sister was. That's how hazy some of the memories were then. However, she must have been there with me, since I recalled both of us leaving soon after. My grandmother told me that my mother was here for me. Clouds were moving over the sky like cotton monsters stalking live prey. I was dying inside. The wind blew my hair back, stranded. At that moment, I just gave my grandmother a quizzical look. Wasn't she my mother? Who was this woman standing in front of me, smiling and trying to hug me? I didn't know her, nor did I recognize her. I just wanted to play. However, dressed in this new dress she had bought us, she was here to take us away. Not only had she left us, now she was back to take us away from the only home we knew. I recall playing with my cousins for the last time, dressed in that long-sleeve dress. The sun was burning my tiny body. My face was a shade of pink covered in sweat. The sun was out, and it was hot in Nuevo Leon, and I was dressed in a long-sleeve dress. My eyes squinted into a frown as I stood with a group of our cousins for what would be one of the last pictures I'd take with them for a long time. The next thing I would have to endure was an 8-hour trip out of Mexico with the birth certificate of a young, deceased girl. As for my sister, she had to pretend to be a boy. Throughout the ride, she assured the occupants riding with us that she was indeed a boy. The trip was even longer since our parents had to make the trip to Chicago, where my parents were living. We stayed in Houston, Texas briefly, and continued to Chicago on the next flight. The memories of our trip were hazy, but when we arrived, we boarded a cab. I do recall losing my coat on the cab ride. It was strange seeing the city streets. If you're a person that's never been to the city or seen paved streets, it would seem amazing, like a completely different planet, especially as a young child. Just looking out the window of our cab ride through the highways was the most exciting thing for a young girl to experience. Things would turn gray after that. I soon learned that while we were in Mexico for 2 years, my parents had a child. He was the first in our family to be born a U.S. citizen. If you don't know Mexican families, they're proud of their boys, and even more now that he was an American. We met him for the first time in our new home, Chicago, as well as my father. My father would later ask us to call him uncle, not father, and several other names, until one day without warning he was angry and insisted we call him father again. Yeah, it was a very confusing time in my life, but it was only going to get far more. The stars were sparkling and blinking back from the dark sky. The story makes more sense to me than my actual life. The first years in the US, both my sister and I would be sexually molested by one of my mother's friend's boyfriends. What I hate about that day is how I still recall what happened vividly. You know how there are things you can't remember in your past, and there are those things that you just want to forget, but can't. For me, is that one thing. The only thing I can't remember is how we ended up alone with him. The apartments in Chicago are a creepy place. The buildings are nothing like Texas dwellings. The apartments are built like hotel buildings, in which you're inside a huge space and share the hallways and stairs with everyone, like New York. I was only aware of the difference when I came to live in Texas. Houston apartments are made a little different. We don't share a large building with a bunch of strangers. The apartments are open, not like a hotel setting. As a child, I recalled being in that creepy alley in the back. I think it was some parking lot, or an empty lot. Our living space was a basement, so it dipped down under the building to get out our door. I know it sounds strange, but I recall it from a child's point of view, and that's how I remember it. There was very little light, mostly coming from street poles from an empty parking lot to the side of the building. There were dumpsters nearby, a deserted field just over the wire rusted fence to the left. It was a creepy place for any child to want to be found in. The man was somewhat in his early 30s. What I remember about him, and can still see in my nightmares, is that caterpillar mustache on his face, along with those dark eyes and that perm dark nest of hair styled into an afro. He was Hispanic, skinny and tall, almost lanky. There was a creepy vibe from him. Even as a child, I sensed malice. The man lifted my sister on his shoulders, and I wasn't sure what I saw first him do to her. He was reaching his hand under her dress. Even as a child, I knew what he was doing was bad and wrong. I begged him to bring her down. My sister was very young, and I don't recall if she even remembers. To this day, I don't have the strength to ask her. It's already hard to write down of the things I recalled that day. After a little while, he put her down, but he had already hurt her. That much I knew. In that very moment, I felt fear for the first time. And you know fear, when you're suddenly faced with something that's out of your control. You can't run, and you're backed into a corner. You're paralyzed, unable to move. Your breathing increases, and suddenly you can hear your own heartbeat inside your throat, and you feel like you're going to choke or stop breathing, because you can't catch your breath. Things are running so fast in your tiny little mind, you can't catch up with one single thought. You can't even scream. That's what I felt in that moment. My heart was racing. Even now I feel that terror, that weakness, and that helplessness, unable to run away or get away. I was afraid for my sister, afraid for me. That man still to this day haunts my memories. When I first was able to talk to my mother about what happened to us as children, she had never taken accountability for this incident. When she discovered what happened, the only thing I recalled her saying was not to tell my father, and to never speak about it to anyone. Even now as an adult, she hasn't taken any responsibility for that incident, or for what I'm about to reveal in this story. When I first revealed the incident to her, Mother came off as victim blaming. I can still hear her accusations. She was blaming me for not stopping what happened to me, for allowing it. Regardless, there was no accountability in her part. This story is not a bio, but a book about an incident that happened to me between the years of 1990 and 1992. Everything you're about to read in this book actually happened. The ramblings of a teenage girl with an incredibly creative imagination should not divert readers from what actually is happening. As stupid as it may sound, those were the thoughts going through the mind of an adolescent during the late 80s and early 90s. Most of the material presented here was taken from journals that survived destruction from the hands of one confused teenager, as well as survived the discovery from parents. The remaining material was taken from memory, and a past that sometimes I was hoping to forget. As surprising as it might be for some of the readers, all the interactions with Sherry were based on real occurrences. Nothing was made up for the sake of this book. It is also true for all the interactions with Mr. CZ and all the following people mentioned in this book. All the names and locations have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved, and the story is based solely on the author's own account of actual events. In regard to the sections or points of view of Mr. CZ, those are mere assumptions of what a man such as he would have been thinking during this period, although some incidents were mentioned by him as having occurred in his life. The rest are mere speculation and fictional, especially those containing his inner monologue or point of view. Furthermore, all names and places have been changed to protect all those involved in the book.